We're going to introduce tonight Larry Elder. He is a gentleman who has a radio talk show host and author of many best-selling books, including The 10 Things You Can't Say in America. Like, for example, oh, never mind. I can't do it. Larry is also founder of Larry Elder's Charities, a nonprofit organization offering non-government self-help solutions to problems of poverty, crime, poor parenting, dependency, and education. He is a man who is brilliant. He's someone that I would never want to have to debate on Fox News. Fortunately, I'm on the same side. Let's give, and he's also not only a graduate of Brown University, but also the prestigious University of Michigan School of Law. Let's give a warm welcome to Larry Elder.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here. It's an honor to be in a room where the Pledge of Allegiance can be recited without somebody taking a knee. I am also honored to be on the list of distinguished speakers that you've had over the past. My goodness, people like Governor Huckabee, Dennis Prager. It's just an honor to be here. And I so encourage people to donate to this wonderful organization. It is, as has been said, the largest pro bono organization that defends religious liberty on the West Coast. And pro bono means without charge, but it does not mean without cost. And to have a case litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court, for example, can often cost hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So it's very, very important for us to be able to provide free legal help to people, for example, who have a florist shop, and a couple comes in and asks them to do a floral arrangement. The owner says, "I'm sorry, this violates my religious principles." They get sued. A gentleman in Colorado who ran a cake shop, Jack Phillips, a gay couple walks in and asks him to bake a cake for a gay wedding. He says, "I can't do that. That violates my religious convictions." He's taken to the Human Rights Commission in Colorado, and the case was litigated all the way up to the Supreme Court, again at the cost of a great deal of money. So please give generously to the Pacific Justice Institute. I was telling Brad that one of the gentlemen on the wrong side of one of their cases is a guy named Michael Newdow. Michael Newdow went to Brown, as did I, went to Michigan for law school, as did I. The fact that I emerged with my brain intact and my common sense intact shows you it can be done. Also, Media Matters, which is a George Soros founded and funded organization, put the Pacific Justice Institute on its list of hate groups. So you are in good company. I was also dinged by Media Matters. I was on Fox and Friends a few months ago, and I was talking about my opposition to reparations. And I said, checks in the mail. I said reparations could be properly seen as extracting money from people who were never slave owners to be given to people who were never slaves. And I pointed out that of all the issues facing this country in general and facing Black America in particular, reparations wouldn't even be on the list. The number one issue, I said, is the growing number of kids who are raised without fathers. Now, 70%, I said, of American Black kids today are raised without fathers. That number was 25% back in 1965 when a guy named Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who later on became a Democratic senator to New York, wrote a booklet called The Negro Family, A Case for National Action. It came out in 1965. At the time, 25% of Black kids were born outside of wedlock. As I mentioned, the number now is 70%. In the Hispanic community, it's almost 50%. In the white community now, it is almost 25%, the same number that caused him to write that alarming book. And I said, it is so bad that, in my opinion, the welfare state has incentivized women to marry the government and allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility. And I said, even during slavery, a child was more likely to be born under a roof with his biological mother and biological father than today. I get back to my office. Media Matters already has a story on me. Headline, Elder says blacks better off during slavery. honestly. The Cliff Notes version of how I got into talk radio, I was living and working in Cleveland. I'm from here, but I was living in Ohio. And I wrote op-ed pieces for newspapers. I didn't have a contract or a deal. I just wrote things that inspired me. And I wrote a piece where I argued that racism was no longer a major problem in America. This is about 30 years ago. And I said that the black middle class is growing. I talked about the fact that in 1940, 87% of blacks lived below the federally defined level of poverty. 20 years later, 1960, that number had been reduced to 47%. A 40-point reduction in 20 years, the fastest 20-year period of economic growth for blacks in history. And that today, if you work hard, get an education, don't make bad moral mistakes, you can make it in America. I get a phone call from a producer from a radio show. He said, "Are you black?" And I said, "I'm told." And he said, "And you don't believe racism is no longer a major problem in America?" I said, "I'm not saying we have reached nirvana. We're never going to reach nirvana. You have 300 million people. A certain number of them are going to be racist. A certain number of them are going to be bigots. Hell, about 8% of the American people believe Elvis is still alive, and about 4% believe if you send him a letter, he will get it. So you start from there." So he invited me on this guy's radio show and asked me if I would do it, and I said, "Sure." So I was on for an hour. Now that I'm in talk radio, having somebody who's never been on radio before stay on for a whole hour is almost an eternity. Cleveland is roughly 50% black, so most of the callers were blacks who were incensed at things I was saying. I was called an Uncle Tom, a bootlicking Uncle Tom, a foot-shuffling bootlicking Uncle Tom, a bug-eyed foot-shuffling bootlicking Uncle Tom, a coconut, as in brown on the outside, white on the inside, Oreo, same concept, the Antichrist, and I was called the name that you call a black person when you really want to cut, hurt, wound, and scold them. I was called Republican. A man can only take so much. So I get back to my office. I said to myself as I was driving, I'll never do this again. Phone rings. It's the station manager. "You were wonderful." I was. "Oh my goodness, you were funny. You have a good speaking voice. You have difficult positions. You defended them without losing your temper or your sense of humor. Have you ever thought about doing talk radio?" And I said, "No." He said, "I have a guy going on vacation next week. I was going to get a pro to sit in for him, but I'd love for you to do it. Will you do it?" I said, "No." He said, "Why?" I said, "I don't like yelling at people. I don't like being yelled at." He said, "Are you married?" At the time I was. He said, "Do me a favor. Go home and talk it over with your wife and call me tomorrow." I said, "I'll do that, but I doubt that I'll change my mind." So I went home and I mentioned it to my wife, Cindy. And she said, "Well, what do you think about talk radio?" I said, "I know nothing about it other than it seems shallow, glib, and stupid." She said, "It is. You'd be good at it." So I've been called all these kinds of names, but you know the name that I've rarely been called? Wrong. Am I wrong? Am I wrong when I argue that this country is not a racist country? Am I wrong? I was watching the CNN and MSN, I call it MSNB hee-haw, the night of the election, 2016. I haven't had that much fun since spring break. It was incredible watching. And I cut it on, and there's Van Jones on CNN, and Van Jones attributed Donald Trump's victory to white lash. And no panelists asked him for any sort of evidence. Is there any study? Do you have any basis to say that? No one challenged it. Now think about this. There are 700 counties that voted for Obama in 2008 and in 2012. Of that 700 counties, 200 of them switched to Donald Trump in 2016. Now, when were the people living in those counties bitten by that racist radioactive spider? When did that happen? The city over 100,000 people population that voted most for Donald Trump is Abilene, Texas. 80% voted for Trump. In the 2010 census, the city is 75% white, 10% black. Guess which city just recently voted overwhelmingly for its first black mayor in its over 100-year history? Abilene, Texas. So how does a racist city that is voting for Donald Trump because they're fearing the fact that the country is becoming increasingly a country of color, and then turn around and vote for a black guy to run the city. How does that happen? There is a study that just came out by two researchers from the University of Pennsylvania, and they have been following around 500 whites as focus groups for almost 10 years. And they admit that they assume that because of Donald Trump, the whites would be more willing to express anti-black and anti-Hispanic views. They were shocked to find the contrary. Since 2015, 2016, these whites were less likely to express anti-black and anti-Hispanic views than before. It's a lie. There is a poll that just came out from Gallup asking people how they feel about diversity. And the support for diversity and the feeling that diversity is a good thing has never been higher for both Democrats and Republicans. One would have thought it would have been the opposite given Donald Trump's alleged racism. It's a lie. The problem we're having in our country is that we are in a battle against what I call the axis of indoctrination. And that's Hollywood, academia, and media. And they are all overwhelmingly left-wing, many of them anti-Christian, anti-Christ, secularist. And it's a battle. In Stephen's industry, of those who gave political contributions, 90% of them went to the Democratic side. I have a girlfriend who was an actress. She has lots of friends in the acting field. And a couple of them visited her not long ago. They were from Michigan, and I wasn't really paying attention to the conversation. I was watching sports. And I overheard, it was a mother who brought her daughter. The daughter was 14 years old daughter. She looked like Sophia Loren. She was gorgeous, and she was doing all sorts of wonderful modeling and print work in Michigan. And her local agent there said that you've got to go to the big time. The big time is LA, and you need to get with one of the major agencies. And she had an interview, the mother and the daughter, with one of the major agencies here in LA. There's only 3 or 4 of them that are really big and powerful, and she was going to have a meeting with one of the big, powerful ones. And I overheard the mother say something about voting for Trump. You're from Michigan? She said, yes. I said, that's a swing state. She said, yes. I said, you're voting for Trump? She said, yes. I said, don't mention that tomorrow. She thought I was joking. She laughed the way you did. I said, I am not joking. If they think you are a conservative, if they perceive you to be a conservative, you will not get a deal. She calls me the next day, and she says, thank God you warned me. For the first 20 minutes, they were trading sentences about what an a-hole Donald Trump is, and had you not said something, I might have said the wrong thing at the wrong time. That's how bad it is. Hollywood is a place where they've greenlight movies like When They See Us. Did anyone happen to see that? It's a miniseries on Netflix about the Central Park Five. The Central Park Five were, as you know, convicted of attacking and the Central Park jogger, and later on they were exonerated, except they did it. There's a documentary that was done by Ken Burns, which means it was on PBS, which means you and I actually helped to pay for it, where they argued that these boys were denied food, denied water, denied access to bathroom facilities, denied access to lawyers, denied access to their parents. The movie shows the boys were denied access to food, access to water, access to bathroom facilities, access to their parents, access to a lawyer. Neither Ken Burns nor the woman that did the miniseries, Ava DuVernay, interviewed Eric Reynolds. Who is Eric Reynolds? Eric Reynolds is the lead detective. How you do a documentary on the Central Park Five and not interview the lead detective is beyond me, but they didn't. But I did. Happens to be black. And he told me that the Central Park Five, contrary to the documentary and to the movie, there was ample evidence that they did it, and not just the confessions. And speaking of the confessions, you can go on YouTube and you can see the confessions yourself. Real boring, all sitting there, drinking a Coke, having water, going to the bathroom facilities, one of them with their parents. It is a complete and total lie that they were denied access to all these facilities. Furthermore, they were convicted of acting in concert. The reason for the assumption that they were exonerated is because some guy named Mateus Reyes admitted that he was the one who raped the Central Park jogger and claims he did it solely. Well, during the trial, the lead prosecutor told the jury that we never found the persons, plural, who raped the Central Park jogger, but these boys did this, they did this, they did this, they did this. They were convicted by a multi-ethnic jury. All you need to know is this. Regarding the miniseries that was done by Ava DuVernay, she admitted in an interview that she interviewed the Central Park jogger's doctor, who informed her that she had been raped by multiple people. So the fact that this guy in prison named Mateus Reyes said he was the sole person, he lied. He flat out lied. And she admitted that she interviewed the doctor, and the doctor told her that she had been raped by more than one person. Therefore, this guy, Mateus Reyes, was clearly lying. And she said, well, yeah, I know he believes that, but we don't, so we did not put it in the film. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? There is another film that was done called Hurricane. Denzel Washington played Reuben Hurricane Carter, a man who was falsely convicted of murdering 3 people, except he really murdered 3 people. There's a website called graphicwitness.com/Carter. It'll take you hours to look at everything, but all the evidence is there, physical evidence, eyewitness evidence. He even took and flunked a polygraph. Contrary to what the movie says, one of the juries that convicted him had 2 blacks, although the character in the movie says that the juries were all white. All of this I was saying on the air one night. I get a phone call, and the phone call is an actor. And the actor played one of the lead characters in the film, and he said, I'm listening to you. I cannot believe what I am hearing. You're telling me that we did a film about a man who murdered 3 people, and in fact, he did it? I don't believe you. I said, do yourself a favor, go to the website I just now mentioned, and call me tomorrow if you have the cashews to do that. To his credit, he called the next night. He said, I'm shocked. I'm stunned. Now think about how difficult it is to get a movie made, Stephen. You know that. How many people do you have to go through? How many people had to look at the script, approve it, green light it, and nobody sought to find out whether or not this book on which this movie was based, which was written by Reuben Hurricane Carter, full of lies, was true or false? This is the town we're in. Academia. American Spectator did an examination some years ago and looked at the registrations of professors, big colleges, small colleges, East Coast, West Coast, North, South, private, public. With a few exceptions, virtually every single one of the humanities department overwhelmingly dominated by left-wing people. Sometimes 7-1, 8-1, sometimes at the department where you'll find not a single registered Republican. Women's studies, forget about it. Sociology, forget about it. Political science, forget about it. And these are what our kids are seeing. And I think most people who are graduates from colleges have no idea how overwhelmingly left-wing the faculty are. And the level coming under them, the assistant faculty and the teaching assistants, are even worse. Do you really believe that people like Elizabeth Warren would want free college tuition if the likelihood is when you go to college you're going to come out more conservative? Dennis Prager, who spoke here, I think, last year, has just done a documentary called No Safe Spaces with Adam Carolla. I urge you all to take a look at it, and it talks about the relentless attack on free speech and religious liberties going on at our colleges and universities. It is outrageous, and most people have no clue what's really going on. And then we have media. There's a book called Left Turn, written by Professor Tim Groves-Close. He used to be at UCLA. He's now at George Mason. And he looked at the top 20 sources where people get their primary sources of news. And 18 of them are left-wing. The only 2 that are right-wing are the Washington Times and the Evening News by Bret Baier on Fox. Outside of that, most Americans get their primary source from the New York Times, the LA Times, Chicago Tribune, NBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, Hee-Haw, and so forth. It is indoctrinating our country. I don't know if you saw the Project Veritas video. Project Veritas, which had a whistleblower who worked for 2 years at CNN, was so disgusted by what he thought was the bias against Republicans and against Trump that he agreed to tape members of CNN without their knowledge. And you have producers, executive producers, people that have been there for a long time saying, shh, this Jeff Zucker, the CEO of CNN, every morning he literally tells us to go after Trump, to the exclusion of other stories that are more important than these stories. I just wish this place was what it was back in the 90s, one of them said. And this is one of the major news organizations where every morning there's a meeting, and Jeff Zucker, the president and CEO, who one CNN worker said hates Donald Trump. Another one said he has a personal vendetta against Donald Trump. And this is one of the major organizations. The group polling organization checked the political registrations of the reporters that cover national news. 7% describe themselves as Republicans. 93% call themselves something else. Washington Post has never endorsed a Republican president in its history. The New York Times has not endorsed one since 1956. So it was amusing watching the last debate held at CNN. It was co-sponsored by the New York Times and by CNN. And you're shocked that they weren't asking any tough questions. You have candidates like Beto O'Rourke, you just saw it on the video, who literally says that any religious organization that does not recognize same-sex marriage should lose its tax-exempt status. This is what we're up against. And we all need to be ready and need to get in the fight. I mentioned that the number one issue in this country are children raised without fathers. I was blessed to have two parents, although my dad and I, thank you, my dad and I shouldn't say my dad and I did not get along, but I should say I didn't get along with him. I was afraid of my father. I thought he spanked us too quickly, hit us too hard. I really had an intense dislike for my dad. Unfortunately, my dad starts a little cafe when I'm around 10 years old, so now I have to work for him. And I did not like working for him either. He would yell at me for doing this, for doing that, for doing this. Now I'm 15 years old, having worked for him for 5 years. And I'd like to tell you that I said to my dad, the next time you yell at me, you and I are going to have a one-on-one conversation, pal. But I was afraid of my father. I couldn't do that. So I told myself the next time he yells at me, I'm going to walk out, which would have been a brazen act of defiance. He yelled at me. I walked out. My dad came home that night. He was furious. He said, "Why did you leave?" And this is the first time I ever spoke back to my father, and I said, "I got sick and tired of the way you spoke to me." My dad paid me $10 a day plus tips. He balled up the $10. He threw it at me as I lay on the bed. He walked out of my bedroom. We did not have a conversation for 10 years. And when I say did not have a conversation, I mean nothing. Not even, do you think it's going to rain? How about those Dodgers? Nothing. Easy to avoid him. He worked long hours. I'm in high school. I graduate from high school. I go to college in the East Coast. I go to law school in the Midwest. And when I come home to visit my parents, and I would just avoid my father. We did not have a conversation for 10 years. Now I'm 25 years old. I just accepted a job with a fancy law firm in Cleveland, making a great deal of money for 25 years old. I should be living large, and I can't sleep. And I know it has something to do with my father. I'm thinking about him. I never thought we'd be friends, but I figured we should at least clear the air. So I called my secretary and I said, cancel all my appointments. I'm going to California. I'll be back in about 3 days. So I flew out to California. Didn't tell my parents I was coming because I didn't want my dad to prepare for this summit. So I walk into the cafe at 1:30. We closed at 2:30. I knew that. And I had 2 big bags. My dad was shocked to see me. And I said, "Dad, I want to talk to you." He said, "Fine. Should I put your bags in the back?" I said, "No, Dad. I'm going to be here for about 5 or 10 minutes. I want to tell you something." He said, "Okay." So I sat there for an hour. As I'm sitting there, I'm thinking about what to say. I said, "Now, Larry, don't tee off on the man. Don't tell him everything he's ever done. Don't give him every offense he's ever done. Just give him the highlights, 5 minutes out the door. Maybe at that point, he'll call you an ungrateful son. You'll call him an SOB. Now you'll be able to sleep." So my father sat down, and I teed off on him. I told him everything he's ever done, everything he's ever said, every slight, every offense, everything. I talked nonstop for almost 20 minutes. You guys know how I can go. And now I'm out of ammo. I'm done. I'm spent. And my dad looks up and he says, "Is that it? You didn't speak to me for 10 years because of that?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Let me tell you about my father." Now I need to pause. I know my dad was an only child, and I met his mother one time. Beyond that, I knew nothing about the man, and I didn't care because I didn't like him. So I'm hearing this for the first time. He said, "Your last name Elder?" I said, "Yes." He said, "That's not the name of my biological father." "What's the name of your biological father?" "I don't know. I'd never met him." "Who's Elder?" Elder was the man who was in my mom's life the longest. He was an alcoholic who sort of worked, and when he worked, he brought home the money because he knew he would drink it away, and then come Wednesday, he'd want it, and if my mother wouldn't give it to him, he'd beat the crap out of her, and if I tried to stop it, he'd beat the crap out of me. He said my mother was illiterate. She could neither read nor write, and she had a series of boyfriends, each one more irresponsible than the one before. My dad said I came home at the age of 13, and I started quarreling with my mom's then boyfriend. She sided with the boyfriend, threw me out of the house, never to return. A 13-year-old black boy at the beginning of the Great Depression, Athens, Georgia, in Jim Crow South. I defy you to find very many people who had a hand dealt like that. I said, "Dad, what did you do?" And for the next 8 hours, my dad talked to me about his life. He said, "I walked down the road, I took anything I could get. I was a shoeshine boy, hotel valet, and ultimately I applied for and got a job as a Pullman porter on the trains. They were the largest private employer of blacks in those days." And my dad said, "On a run, I went out to California, and you could literally walk into a restaurant and get served." He always told me he had 10 cans of tuna and crackers because you never knew in the South whether or not you were going to be able to get a meal, so you often had to be ready. So my dad made a mental note. California seemed so much more liberal. LA did. I'll make a mental note and maybe someday I'll relocate to Los Angeles. Pearl Harbor. My dad joins the Marines. I said, "Dad, why the Marines?" 2 reasons. They go where the action is, and I love those uniforms. My dad was stationed on Guam, World War II. The bombs fell. War's over. My dad goes back to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where he had met and married my mom. My dad was in charge of cooking facilities. He was a staff sergeant. My dad can look at a cake, look at a pie, tell you what's in it. So he goes to restaurant to restaurant to restaurant in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and they tell him, "We don't hire niggers." My dad goes to an unemployment office. The lady says, "You went through the wrong door." He goes out, sees colored only, goes through that door to the very same lady who sent him out. My dad came home to my mother and said, "This is BS. I'm going to Los Angeles. I'm going to get a job as a cook, and I'll send for you." So my dad comes out to LA. He walks around for a day and a half, 2 days, and he's told, "You have no references." My dad said, "I've cooked for the military. What do you mean I have no references?" "You have no references." Ultimately, my dad said to one of them, "I will work for free for 2 weeks. Either give me a job or give me a reference after 2 weeks." They still wouldn't do that. He was treated the very same way in LA as he was treated in Chattanooga. They were perhaps a little more polite about it. This time, he went to an unemployment office, just one door. He said to the lady, "I'll take the first thing you have." She said, "I have nothing right now." He said, "I'll sit here until you have something." My dad sat in the chair, for a day and a half. Coming back the second day, she called him up and she said, "Sir, I have something. I'm not sure you're going to want it." My dad said, "Of course I'm going to want it. What is it?" She said, "It's a job cleaning toilets and Nabisco brand bread." My dad did that for 10 years, took a second job with a bread company called Barbara Ann Bread, also cleaning toilets, 10 years, cooked for a family on the weekend, and went to night school 2 or 3 nights a week to get his GED. The man never slept. That is why he was so grouchy all the time. 15 minutes here, 45 minutes here, half hour sleep here, and then you come home to a home with 3 rambunctious boys. What kind of mood do you think you're going to be in? So as my dad is telling me this, he is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and I am getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and now I'm crying. And I said, "Dad, can you please forgive me?" And he said, "Larry, there's nothing to forgive. You didn't know. But I want you to follow the advice I've always given you and your brothers. Hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. Larry, you cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you bitch, moan, and whine about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and say, what could I have done to change the outcome? And finally, Larry, no matter how hard you work, no matter how good you are, bad things will happen. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me if we raised a man." Thank you. I wrote about all of this in a book about my family, about my father, called Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, about the 8-hour conversation. And the gentleman just told me that He had read it, and it inspired him, and he feels that my book has caused a lot of people to reach out and reconcile with their father, with their son, with their parents. And I get letters like this all over the country, and I cannot tell you how moving it is. I gave a speech once at the Ronald Reagan Library, and I mentioned that my mom and my dad were there, and they stood up, gave my mother and father a standing ovation. And I'm sitting here watching this. My father, who does not know his father, is getting a standing ovation at the Ronald Reagan Library. Only in America can something like this happen. Only in America. My mother was raised on a farm in Huntsville, Alabama. And for a black family to have their own farm is almost like royalty. And my mother always told me that my future depended upon my ability and willingness to work hard. We went over an illustrated book of presidents, from George Washington to the then incumbent Dwight Eisenhower, every single one of them. And she said to me, this is 1958 because we hadn't moved to our new house yet. And she said, Larry, someday, if you want it, you can be in this book. Now, I never aspired for that, but I never, ever doubted that that was achievable if I worked hard and if I wanted it. What is the excuse today? We have think tanks on the left, think tanks on the right. One of them is called the Brookings Institution. It's probably the most prominent think tank on the left. And one of the most prominent think tanks on the right is called the American Enterprise Institute. They agree on one thing, though. In order to make it from poverty to the middle class, you need to do three things. Finish high school. Don't have a kid before you're 20 years old, and get married before you have that kid. And both these think tanks say if you follow that formula, one calls it the millennial success sequence, you follow that formula, you will not be poor. I think it's an insult to act as if racism is holding back people today when all the people who fought, and many of them died, to get us to the point where we are right now, where a black man could become president and get reelected president. You know, Obama got a higher percentage of the white vote than Mitt Romney did. Trump got a lower percentage of the white vote than Obama got a higher percentage of the white vote than John Kerry did 4 years earlier. And Trump got a lower percentage of the white vote than did Mitt Romney 4 years earlier. The idea that this is a racist country is almost offensive when I look at my life, the life of my mother, the life of my father. Regarding my mother, she always told us, nobody can make you feel inferior without your permission. And when I was in high school, we read a poem by a guy named Countee Cullen. And it went like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. Well, the teacher was furious, the class was furious, I was furious, everybody was furious. The teacher talked about this permanently staining his psyche. He'll always be branded as a second-class citizen. He'll never get over this. I knew my mother was going to have a different perspective. I came home that day. My mother was in the kitchen stirring a big pot of greens and frying some chicken. I'll never forget it. And I said, Mom, we read a poem in class. I want to get your reaction to it. She said, go ahead. I said, it goes like this. While riding through old Baltimore, so small and full of glee, I saw a young Baltimorean keep a looking straight at me. Now, I was young and very small, and he was no whit bigger, and so I smiled. But he poked out his tongue and called me nigger. I saw the whole of Baltimore from May until September. Of all the things that happened there, that's all that I remember. She took the spoon out of the pot, hit it on the side, turned to me, and she said, Larry, what a darn shame he let something like that spoil his vacation. How many wings do you want? I want to leave you with this quick story. I was telling you about the excessive indoctrination, Hollywood, academia, media, and the crazy views. You take a position, whether it's race-based preferences or whether it's reparations, and academia is far more likely to embrace it than non-academia. I'm at a gas station, just a few months ago, and I get out, and I had on a nice suit that was tailored by one of my clients. I was driving a car that was given to me by one of my clients, and I got my substantial credit card, getting me some premium gas, and sitting there, a car pulls up on the other side, a 1968 maroon Dodge Polara with a busted muffler, roaring up. And it's got a out-of-state license plate, a southern license plate. I won't tell you the state because I don't want there to be any stereotypes. But the two guys that got out, I could tell they were father and son because they looked alike. Very, very pale, pasty skin. Might have had 10, 12 teeth together. And they got $5 of regular. And then they lumbered out. And as they were leaving, I said, wow, just think. Those two dudes owe me reparations. Is this the great country or what? Thank you so much for having me. God bless the Pacific Justice Institute, and may God bless America. I love you. I love you. Thank you.
My goodness.